There might be stop boxes all over the floor, but that's because there's trains running. Come and see how I've got on with my layout build.
The last time I did an update, I was working on the fiddle yard, and while I was determined that I would finish it, I got bored with that idea and decided to move on to the scenic section. So the most important thing would be putting ideas into practice. I previously talked about my plan, changes to it, and now it was time to try and implement it. I wanted to try and keep my model of Swindon panel into the layout if I could, but its titanic size has kind of made it redundant, as it's just a little bit too big to fit in what will be the junction. I had plenty of track from the previous layout build, so it was an easy option of just laying out some points and getting a rough idea of how things were going to look. And I soon had a plan. Okay, so I've played around with the track, I've got a few ideas, and those of you who have seen previous videos would know that the rough plan for this, just to remind you and anyone new watching, just to update you, the idea is that we come out the fiddle yard, we're going to go around here. This will be a 2-track main line, which should be the East Coast main line, ideally. Coming along here, ignoring this line for the moment, that will be the preservation line above. And we get to the junction here where the line splits, and the 2 tracks heading towards that Paddington Bear Cup will be the East Coast main line, continuing on and going around the edge of the room back to the fiddle yard. And then here, this will be a Trans-Pennine route. There's 3 lines, so this is a goods loop, and these are the up and down lines. The goods loop is accessed here or exited here, and we'll come back to this bit in a second. So yeah, the Trans-Pennine route, that'll go down all the way down along that L girder section, and where the spring bridge is, it points, it will go across there and then comes out from that little gap just underneath there of the fiddle yard, and we're just going to follow the fiddle yard all along here, and then we'll tuck around here to go underneath and to a storage area and return loop over there. So that's the general idea. Now, for the layout to work, I want to sort of run it operationally end-to-end kind of style. And to do that, one of the things I have to consider is, whilst it's fine that I can reach any road from here, realistically, when you get to the fiddle yard, you know, DMUs and anything with, you know, a cab at either end is going to be fine. They can just drive straight in and straight back out. Freight trains are different, obviously, because if a loco and train comes in here, we then have it facing that way, and really the only way it can then continue is to go back round on the circuit, and kind of spoils the illusion that the train's gone somewhere. So to get round that, I have decided to build a stabling depot. I don't know if I'll have a maintenance shed, I'm not sure yet. And the idea is that the locos will be stabled here. There'll be a fueling point somewhere around here, or possibly a maintenance shed and a fueling point there. We'll talk about that in a second. And the idea is the freight train, most of them will come off the Trans-Pennine line, across the junction, onto the East Coast main line, into the fiddle yard, park up in there, and then we call out another loco, say there's 58, call it out onto the head shunt, out there, back into the fiddle yard, and it hooks onto the back of the freight train in the fiddle yard, and then that's ready to go back. So eventually it will then leave, goes back that way, back onto the Trans-Pennine route, back to the storage road underneath. The loco that's left on the storage road, we then bring back out, all the way along here, etc. And then that one will then tuck in onto the stabling roads. And that way I can cycle through the locos. The freight trains look like they've been doing something, and as if there's a yard further along the line, and stuff gets sorted there. And it gives you a bit more operational interest to the layout. So that's the idea. I think that'll be quite fun. East Coast main line freight, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. They may just end up having to go round in circles, and that's just sort of a sacrifice I have to make. Mostly like, it'll be like Freightliner trains with a 90 or a 92 anything overhead electric, basically, because this line will not be overhead electric. But I may possibly, if I can, see if I can get a storage road coming off the fiddle yard over there, just to store a couple of locos, so I can switch them around and do the same thing over there. But we'll see. It's not the end of the world if I can't. If I just have this little bit of operational interest, that should keep me entertained for now. So, yeah, that's the plan. I'll talk a little bit more about the depot. So, depot-wise, we can access the depot through this little junction here, onto the goods loop here. I've got a trap point to prevent any runaways getting onto the main line. And then this will be wide enough to accommodate a loco. So if you brought a loco in from this route, you can change locos or run one in and put it on the sidings. Head shunt here where this 60 stands, and then we go into 3 various roads for storage. And then I thought maybe having a fueling point here or possibly here. So that's where this point comes in. But I'm also sort of thinking about putting a set of points in here. And then this middle road is sort of accessed from either side, and then maybe like a maintenance shed or something, just a light maintenance shed that locos can access either side, and it can be maintained there and it can be refueled there, and we just swap around locos on those sidings over there, and then sort of make use of the track and that, and just have a bit more head shunt there. I'm not sure. I'm in 2 minds. I might do that. I might not. I'm going to think about it. Just because I think both designs have their pros and cons, and I'm not desperate for a maintenance shed, but I would like something for this 08 shunter to do, because it's kind of not got any work at the moment with the layout plan, so it's kind of redundant. But if we sort of had a maintenance shed here, it could kind of be used for moving stock around or the occasional wagon repair or something, but we'll see. But after recording a podcast featuring Sanford East and talking about the benefits of having a depot, I decided that I would include a maintenance shed. If you haven't heard my podcast, it's called the Model Rail Replacement Podcast, and I do it with Emperor's Path. Each Monday we release a new episode where we either have a guest for an interview, discuss a topic, or on the occasion have a battle over favourite locomotives. You can find us on Spotify or anywhere else that you can get your podcasts. Now that I had the track plan, it was time to plan out how the baseboards would work out. As I'd shown on a previous episode, I had raised the fiddle yard to allow for open baseboard construction on the scenic side of the baseboards. So this meant a bit of planning to work out where scenery would go and track etc. before cutting the wood. This part here would be cut out and raised, whereas it come to the depot area, this would be a majority flat area and would just require the baseboards being unscrewed, new risers and cleats put underneath, and then levelled out to match the rest of the height of the baseboards. The only other adaptation that would happen here would be at the back of the baseboard, which would be cut away and lowered to allow for an embankment or possibly higher scenery above the track, depending on what design I go for in the end. Right, so all the baseboards have now been cut, just for this section anyway, and I've relayed the points where they're going to go, so I just marked out roughly the positions of them, and that's so I know where to put the beams as not to interfere with the point motors. So that'll be the next job, is adding the beams, risers, etc. to lift this all up into the air and get it to the same level as the fiddle yard, which is over there. With everything marked up, out came the jigsaw and the baseboards were cut, the risers and cleats installed, and the ground raised like some sort of X-Men rising it up. On some parts of the layout, some out-of-the-box thinking was required, such as here where I used plywood rather than softwood to lower the amount of area covered, which would allow points and point motors to be installed above the join. The downside of retrofitting these baseboards to make them open plan was that they required a little more extra woodwork that would have been a lot easier to install when I first built the boards. Such as demonstrated here, there was a lot of sagging in between the areas where the beams had gone across because they now required extra strengthening. As I progressed with the build during the time between, I managed to pop out to a few exhibitions. The advantage of this is all the trade that supports them. In particular, when I went to the Key Model World Live, I managed to pick up from DMG a capacitor discharge unit that was a lot more powerful than the previous one I'd purchased. It also came with paperwork explaining various things like length of wire would require be thicker the further away from the point motor to the discharge unit was, which was something I wasn't aware of at the first time of installing. But unfortunately, not even that capacitor discharge unit had the power to throw all the point motors at the same time. I did wonder if maybe it was true about the wiring and the fact that it was so far between that there just wasn't enough power getting to the point motors. However, as you will see in the future, I decided to abandon this plan and go for something else. I say in the future, I've not actually installed the new point motors yet, so that's something to come.
Now you'll have to forgive me because this could be another video which jumps through time and I have no idea what I've told you I was doing and any idea I showed you what was what. Anyway, as you can see, the baseboards have now been lifted up. I do recall talking about this and filming this, so I think there's some footage. You should have seen it by now. And I've done the first three. You can see all the way to this point here. And then from previous videos, you know that I flipped this board here with the intention of building a river. And I'm thinking more of a canal now. Just so I can put a lock in. I thought that might be quite a nice detail. And then a bridge there. Or maybe a viaduct, because it is fairly deep, I think. Or maybe like the lock there and the viaduct here. It's things to consider anyway. But that's later on. So you can see I've roughly laid out the track where I want to build the yard. And then let's just say the boards, get my words out. The boards are in the air. So first things first, I've started on one of the curves. I will be doing sleeper spacing because the last layout had sleeper spacing. I regret it, to be honest. It looks nice, but oh my god, it's so tedious. And it's, if you want that satisfaction of it looking right, and if you're going to use ball head track as well, I think you need to do it because it just, the standard HO track next to the ball head track just looks so wrong. And that's why I'm doing it, because I'm going to be using ball head on the preserve line above. So you can see I've just marked out where the first curve is going to go. This is one advantage of doing this in the black and using like these paint pens. It's a lot easier to see like this nice pink line to work with. Bring it around, there's the first set of points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do elevated curves. What that is basically if you look at tracks in real life, when they go around the curve, there's a bank on them and the track is slightly lifted at this side, and that helps the train turn into the curve, and the theory is it, you know, prevents flange wear and stuff like that. So I'm going to be doing that, building it up and installing this first part of the track.
And so that's what I did, but I think I'd made two mistakes. I'd made the bank too high and the curves were too sharp. They're not too sharp in general, they're over a 4th and a 5th radius, I'd say, but with the banking, I later found out when it came to testing that the locos, in particular the Class 56 by Cavalex, did not like elevated curves. But at this moment in time, I was blissfully unaware of what was to come, and so I continued with the track laying, going back towards the fiddle yard to complete that part of the circuit before heading back out into the scenic section all the way round to the other end of the fiddle yard.
Okay, so on the scenic side, point motor wise, it's not as tricky as what the fiddle yard's been, because I invested some time ago in some Cobalt digital points, and these have been used on the previous layout, so you can see that the arm is not centered. And to install them, you need to center the arm. So it's taken me a little bit of time to try and work out how to do that, because it's been a while since I programmed these. So what I do is I get the point, I just double check its address, the current one, to make sure it's working. So this is address number 10. I have a very old Digitrax DT400, so it's not a bad controller, but it's definitely limited in its functions in comparison to other controllers these days. So on here it's the switch button. There we are. And put in the address 10. Now it's flashing because it doesn't know the position of the turnout. And if I press C, there we go. You can see there's T. So I know it works, I just now need to center it. So to do that, I need to take the point motor. There's a switch here. You put it onto set. Push it that way. You can see on this side it says set. With the camera focus you would. There you go. And now I need to program the address 199. So put 199 in here. Oops, that's too many. Fat fingers, try that again. There's address 199. I'll press C just to send a command to that point motor. I'll then press T just to affirm it. And now I need to switch the power off. Put it back on. And with a bit of luck, I think I did that too quick. Oh no, there we go. And now the point motor has centered itself. So that's how you recenter a point motor. So if you bought these second hand, the digital ones, that's how to center them. And then just don't forget to put the switch back in the run position once you're done. And that's now ready for installation. And then once it's installed, it can be programmed with a new address. Reading through the instructions for the Cobalt digital IP point motor, there is a lifetime guarantee on these points, which is great, and they claim that they will last up to 75 years, which is well beyond what I probably need them for. So, to keep them maintained, it recommends that they be oiled every 5 years. So that's something to consider when you're installing the points on your layout, that they may need to come off and be oiled at some point, or at least get this case off. The fact they have that little rubber sticker on the top make things a bit tricky. They do come off, and then you can just, as I've done here, I've just cleaned what remained off with a bit of IPA, and that's just rubbed away, ready for application of a new sticker. They do sell these pads as accessories, and you can also buy new arms, etc. So if you are using second-hand points, or you're reusing the points, you don't have to worry about, you know, this being too short or not being able to get another sticker or something like that. So bit thought of everything really. I'm going to open this up, and we're just going to see how easy it is, because I've never done this before, to oil the point motor. And already I can't undo the screw, so it's a good start. So, instructions does say to open up your point motor. It says it here. Blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I'm not doing that wrong. This might be a bit tight. I'm gonna pause the video, and when I can get it open, I'll come back. So, what I was concerned about pulling this apart was it breaking. And, it was really, I mean, the instructions say it's easy to pull apart. It was not easy to pull apart. It took a little bit of effort, and unfortunately, then all the gears jumped out. So now I've got to put the puzzle back together, which is really annoying. So, but as you can see, look, it has dried up in there. And that is, and this could be the one I bought. I bought one of these sets of points many years ago, and then I bought the others a little later on. But at the top of my head, I think the one I bought actually has orange switches on the bottom. So I think this one is probably 3 years old, 4 years old. So you can see that all the grease has dried up in it. So it does need a maintenance. It's just a case of I've now got to try and piece this back together. So wish me luck with that.
Whilst the point motor decided to explode on me and throw the gears across the room, I did manage to put it back together, and managed to oil it up and keep it serviceable for another 5 years. Thankfully, the point motor did work again, and will be used in the future on the layout. After my third point motor, I kind of got the knack of pulling them apart and gently prising them open. There seems to be a bit where the casing sits on the point motor that kind of welds it together. I'm not sure why, because I don't imagine the point motor really overheats with its use. In particular, they never had a lot of use from the last time I put them on the layout, maybe 15 swings maximum. But there you go, that's how to take them apart, that's how to look after them, and if you're like me, I dread 5 years' time when they have to come off the layout for their next lubrication. And so I continued with the build. Ironically, I haven't actually installed those point motors in the end. I had a few issues when trying to work out how to wire up the diamond crossing, and in my decision to just actually get some things running, I've bodged the wiring to allow the frogs to just be permanently wired to the running rail. There's no diverging route at the moment, and it means that stuff can actually just circle round the room for the time being. I'll cover the points and wiring up the diamond in a future episode. So next was to move on to the bridge and the rest of the main line.
I progress with the bridge then, and as you can see I've put this piece of wood in, and then I've added a batten to hold up in the air, and I've just got these. I'm not sure if I will go with them, but they're just to represent roughly where I think I want the bridge to go. And then I was looking at the height, and I think coming from here I definitely could get a viaduct in here. So I think sort of, yeah, a bridge over canal there, maybe a lock about here, so it drops, so it's lower here, and then a viaduct here. So that's in my mind for that. The other thing is, I'd flip this upside down. I think in the previous video I explained, because I had this idea that this was what the river was going to be, and I was going to cut in here, sort of building the base. But I kind of realised that whilst I put this piece of wood on the top, I'm wasting a massive amount of wood underneath. I don't think I need this here. I think I can find alternative ways of building the scenery. So I now need to work out how I'm going to remove it, because I think this is anchored. Yeah, it is. So I've got an idea. I think I know what I do. I'll show you when I've done it.
I solved the problem by removing the large board and replacing with a smaller offcut of plywood that I then drilled through and reattached the L girders for the other part of the baseboard. And so with that problem solved, I continued building the roadbed for the track.
So working on the roadbed, I have decided to work right round the corner, and as you can see here, I've got some set track curves, and that is because I am going to hide this bit in a tunnel. So tunnel mouth around here, all that will be covered, and it'll maybe pop back out here. I haven't quite worked out what I'm going to do here, but probably pop out and then disappear again, just sort of like a glimpse of the train passing through a gap and then going into the tunnel and then popping out again. So yeah, I've just gone looking through my wood box down there, got a load of scraps I'm going to cut together, and that will hold the corners up. I'm hoping that's going to be okay, because it's second radius, so most models are designed for second radius curves. I really hope that's going to be okay, otherwise that might be a problem. But yeah, so I'm going to cut that out, pop that up, and then bridge between that bit of wood and that bit of wood there, and just a little bit more around the corner until I get to the swing gate. So I'm almost there. It's very exciting.
And so progress with the layout continued, fixing the roadbed down where I could, although some times of night meant that it wasn't always possible to complete a job, such in this instance where it's around 11 in the evening, and I don't think my neighbours would appreciate me getting the chop saw out just to finish off the job. Now, one of the traps I was falling for, that we all tend to do as modellers, was keeping everything parallel to the baseboards, which always looks a little odd when you come to a final model. So with this, I readjusted the roadbed so it came at a slight angle, as demonstrated by this gap here, which, the further along you went, made the gap at the back even wider and wider, allowing the track to slightly curve away from the wall and allow for scenic development behind. And so I came to the final hurdle, the track bed around the swing gate. And because of what I had planned, I had to really sort of lay out the track and work out if my ideas would actually work. As can be demonstrated in the next few clips, you'll see that they won't.
Okay, so as I was talking about the possibility that this will probably have to be a single line because of point motors, I was thinking about the points that are going to go here and obviously the points that are here. And then I come to a realisation that obviously my track is going to go under here,
with the intention, where this cross-country stands, of coming out here. And the problem with that is, as you can see, there's not a lot of clearance. I still have to have track and cork bed, and there's a lot of points above it. So I've been a bit like, oh no, yeah. So I've spoken to a friend who's given me the dimensions of the same point motor I intend to buy, and even better news, they can be surface mounted. So I think to get around this problem, I will have to surface mount this point motor at least, maybe this one. Fortunately, I've got the space. If I can do that one, I might be all right. I might be able to get away with 2 tracks, but I'm having a feeling that I might just have to do for a single line, just to make life a bit easier at getting underneath the fiddle yard. That's why it's always good to plan. Let's put it that way. I continue with the build and put the track bed up for the 2 main lines, but I was really walking into trouble here. There was going to be a few issues that were going to be raised that I hadn't quite realised yet. That set of points right in front of you being one of them. As I progressed with this section, I realised that it really would have to be a single line coming from the branch line station, so to speak, on the Transpennine route to get underneath the fiddle yard. Trying to fit 2 lines under there was just a bit too much of a challenge. That's going to be demonstrated here, but this would already be taken out and replaced by something else in the future. However, I decided that 1 line would be enough, and it would benefit me as a single operator trying to work the room with 2 main lines and a double track branch line. At least I'd have the flexibility of stopping trains at signals and holding them to get onto the single line. And with that roadbed in place, I decided to paint the rest of the layout. I'm kind of wasting my time. You'll find out why in a minute. And just like that, I've gone and whipped some black paint all around, and I always think the boards look a lot smarter just for a coat of the black paint. Makes them look a bit tidier. I eventually come to my senses and reduced my ambition to use set track on the curves everywhere. I'm not quite sure what I was thinking there. In this instance, I added an extra piece of wood which would allow for a much smoother curve on the corner. I'd also abandoned the tunnel idea, as this meant that most of the scenics, of the main line at least, would be in a tunnel. And whilst I had progressed with the trackbed quite well, including the dreaded sleeper spacing, the corners going in with elevated curves, I came round to the section that would join the fiddle yard. And here is where problems were really starting to appear. Firstly, I'd cut the wood thinking that I'd got the curves all correctly marked out and that I'd got everything planned. I come to lay the track over the top, there wasn't enough wood. On top of that, the position of the points actually meant that they were sitting on some of the risers, as demonstrated here. This really wasn't going to do. Something was going to have to be done about this problem. Now, when I talk about problems, I don't just mean with the layout itself, because it also turns out there's a lot of footage missing. And we kind of jump ahead into time here. Now, one of the problems I had with the previous design was I was using a set track curve, but that's a second radius curve, which was on the outside loop, and so I kind of realised that I was trying to put a first radius curve on the inside loop, and that's a big no-no, particularly for the type of trains I want to run. So at this point, I relayed the track, and I'd also rebuilt the baseboards. Now, the larger baseboards on the top meant that I had a bigger surface area, although why I brought it so forward I'm not quite sure, but that's done and dusted now, I'm not going to change it. The idea here was that with the additional baseboard I could add some loco spurs, one on the very far left of this shot, which would hold a loco, which could access any of the sidings, which would allow me to run a freight train in, then bring the fresh loco off the spur and take the train back out. I also then added an additional siding, as can be demonstrated by the Pullman coach just in shot, which would hold 2 locos. However, I will lay this and you will see it doesn't quite work out, and it's probably because I'm trying to use set track points again, but I never learned. However, blissfully unaware what problems would occur, the track was all down, and all that would be required was wiring it up. And so the big day came. The day where I would be able to run a train around the room. Possibly. I'd added some catches to the swing gate, one on each side. This made sure that the gate couldn't accidentally be opened and that you were consciously aware that you were undoing the gate. Although the other day I was very unaware that I hadn't shut the gate and the Class 57 was lucky not to hit the floor. And so with my newer Curaçao Class 66s all out of their boxes, what better loco than to test the layout? We'd see how far we get before we got a short circuit. The answer was not very far at all. In fact, I had wired up the remaining loop completely opposite to what the fiddle yard was. But it seemed problem after problem was being found with the test run of the locos.
So as it's easy to lift, I've got the 08 just going round. So we've got a dead section here. Now, I know the power does come because it goes as far as here, because this is the end of the... So it's got to be the dropper connectors. Now what I've done is I've used these. Now what I've got the feeling is that these wires here are not actually connected. But usually there's quite a few droppers. And it's dead all along here. In fact, there's no breaks insulation wise along this entire section of main line. So we come along here, we'll drop it back down here. Off it goes again over the points, they're fine, and we come to a stand again. That section's dead, and then I'll drop it over here. And it goes again. So I've got to work out why those two mainline sections have got no power. I suspect it is something to do with the droppers and probably the connections. So it's a case of pulling everything out and having another look.
The problem indeed was the connectors. The wire was just too thin for it to effectively be cut and make contact. So I took a few off, got some of the old chocolate block style connectors and added them instead.
And with a bit of wiring up, the down line at least is running.
Eventually I got both lines working, but the testing proved there was a few issues. One of them was the set of points in the fiddle yard, where the set track curve between the two of them wasn't at the quite right angle, and although most locomotives would pass over, the 66s did not like it at all and kept derailing. The bank curves here were too steep, causing trouble. The 66s groaned round them and the 56s didn't even go round them. They came off every time. At this set of points, some of the 56s liked to derail. Some would pass over, some wouldn't. It was rather odd, but I suspected it wasn't actually the points, but the elevated curve down the other end. These curves were probably the worst of all. The one on the back, which was already in the progress of being lifted when filmed, had everything derail on it, and I mean everything. Nothing could pass over without coming off the line. The other one caused issues with the 56. Again, I think the banking was too high for the steepness of the curve. And the final problem was this set of set track points where the Class 90 sat. Anything trying to go out of the yard over them would derail, and when you looked, they weren't quite straight, which meant that the wheels were getting buckled as they hit. This section would also have to come out. I tried to rectify the problems on this corner by first lowering the banks, but that wasn't enough for some locomotives, and so in the end I took the corners up and relaid them and made the curves a little more gentle. I still wanted elevation on the curve, but this time I went a lot more gentle, with just using card strips, and I ran them for a lot further than I had done with the cork banking. This was a far greater improvement. Next was the fiddle yard. When I cut the piece of track away between the two sets of points, the set track points sprung back into their correct position, and you could see why trains were derailing on them. This was going to be a little more awkward. Even if I took the points away and tried to add a piece of flexi track, As demonstrated here, you could see that the curve was still too sharp. This was going to require a complete relay of the fiddle yard. This corner was probably the easiest to do. I simply lifted the track, removed the cork that was underneath, relayed a new cork bed and placed the track back down. The curve completely flat with no elevation, but as this area is probably going to be hidden by the heritage line and a tunnel, it probably doesn't really matter. With the curves now sorted, I concentrated on the fiddle yard. This end indeed needed a complete rebuild. So I took the old track up and took some points out, redesigned it and came up with a much smoother transition into the fiddle yard. I still managed to fit an extra loco spur in, as can be seen by the Y set of points next to the TV remote, which will allow 2 locos to be stored just before the swing gate. The other end would need a rebuild as well, although not as drastic. I had hoped I could move the points back to align them to the set of points that were coming out of the yard, but this just didn't match up and pulled everything out. The only way to keep everything aligned was to actually move the points forward and make lines 1 and 2 slightly shorter. The added advantage of laying it this way meant that there was a loco spur coming off line 1, which means you could run a freight into line 1, take the locos off one end, and then because of the loco spur at the other end, join and run out a brand new train. But after all that, the issues were rectified, the layout rewired, and testing could commence before running of trains.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a long one, but as you can see, it's been a bit of a long journey. I didn't want to keep putting videos of me just building and not really getting anywhere, so that's why I've left it for a couple of months. And now we have trains running. I am going to do some thorough testing of the main lines, find any flaws. I'm trying a few things with rolling stock, so that's something I have to look into in the future. But hopefully you've liked this video, so if you have, please click the like button. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button. And hopefully I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.
Oh, you're still here. Why not watch another video? I've got exhibitions, podcasts, layout builds, you name it.